Flap TV. Our guest this episode, Anthony Zarrella, City Councilor, City of Fitchburg, and City Councilor Claire Freda of Leominster. Thank you both for joining us today.
Thank you.
Issue 1, elected officials have a duty to represent the views of their constituents. They also have a responsibility to represent the best interest of their communities and its future. And sometimes those goals can be in conflict. Should elected officials defer to the will of the majority, or should they do research, use their best judgment, and do what they feel is right? Cindy?
I think they should do the will of the voters. That's if the majority of the people want it, they've already given it the thought, and I think that's what they got to go with.
Councilor Zarrella?
I think, as I've said before, that really it's important to listen to the voters and to learn from what the voters have to say. But at the end of the day, the buck stops here. I'm the one who people elected, and it's a responsibility to use judgment and to do the independent homework and say, okay, I need to do sometimes the unpopular thing because it's going to be better for my constituents in the long run based on information that may be, non-public or anything of that nature.
Mm-hmm. Very good.
You've got to exercise independent judgment.
Councilor Freda?
I could go both ways on this. I mean, the will of the voter, depending on what the subject is. I mean, but and I don't want to get into the marijuana issue, but if you get into the legislature not doing their job because it was brought to them enough times where the public wanted them to deal with it, they didn't, so you have a citizen petition, but the citizen petition isn't legal, so now you got another issue to look at. So I think it's a responsibility of a community to look at it and make sure that all the community is being served. When I run into somebody in the grocery store and they bring up an issue to me, I don't ask them if they're in the majority or the minority or if they supported me or voted for me. They live in the city, they're residents, and they deserve to be represented.
Michael?
I mean, doesn't it really depend on the issue? I mean, I could, with some effort, circulate a petition in the city of Fitchburg, for instance, like maybe get a majority of the registered voters sign a petition, say, we want all the roads to be fixed, or we want taxes to be immediately slashed. And the city councilors are going to have to use their judgment and use their expertise to see, well, is this something that we can actually accomplish in the real world? However, certain things you mentioned in passing the marijuana referendum, maybe a different category because it's been tried and adopted in Colorado, in Washington State. This is something that Massachusetts followed other states, and there's a track record there. So I do think that anything that would look to subvert any of that progress could be looked at as thwarting the will of the voters, and that would be something that would really require a lot more scrutiny, in my opinion.
So, and it's not an accident that we're bringing up this subject when we have Councilor Zarrella and Councilor Freda on. I asked you both to come on to discuss this issue because both of you have taken some heat on social media for your views. So I think it was important to give you both the opportunity to come and not necessarily defend yourself, but to offer that clarity and to offer those opinions and to give you that platform to be able to do so. So I suppose a question that I would have for the both of you is, do you see a difference? I mean, Michael brought up an example of getting a petition and having a bunch of people sign a petition, or doing a poll on Facebook or something like that, versus an actual vote where there is a vote on a voter initiative where everyone can vote and they count those votes. Do you put a different sort of weight toward deciding something where there's a voter initiative, or do you use those same sets of criteria in using your own judgment?
Personally, I put virtually no weight at all on informal polling simply because that's the industry I work in. I'm the attorney for a market research company, and I know exactly how misleading a straw poll can be. So when I see something on Facebook that says, 75% of the people on this site want this, it's like, okay, well, this site isn't representative of the whole city, and the people who voted aren't even representative of the whole site, so it means nothing. But when it's an actual vote, then at the very least, I would think it is my responsibility to implement the broad principle that the voters voted for, again, if it's feasible, as Michael said. But the details are very much a job for the legislators because the general public doesn't necessarily have access to, say, the city solicitor to draft a law or to figure out what's in keeping with the charter and so forth. That's our job.
Great. Councilor Freda, difference between a voter initiative? Do you put more weight when it comes to a voter initiative, or do you use that same filter for all decisions in using your best judgment and
I
research?
think I would use the same for all decisions. I mean, depending on what the issue is. I mean, going back to what Michael said, you bring up Colorado, we're not Colorado, we're Massachusetts. You need to look at what's best for Massachusetts, not the rural sections of Colorado. So, I mean, I think you have to look at what the issues are in your own community, your own state, and put your best weight on it.
Cindy, anything?
Well, again, I think it does, what Michael said makes sense. I mean, there's some things, if, the majority of voters will all say, we all want lower taxes. That's not realistic, sometimes. So I think it depends on the issue. But I think when we talk about the marijuana issue and that you're talking about something that, a large majority of people have obviously thought about it for a long time. They want it here, it's approved. And now it's time to implement it. A couple of years has gone by to figure out how to do that, and so I think the majority of the voters, they've spoken out, and I think that really does need to take precedent.
I think you just pointed out the issue. It took a couple of years to figure out where the state was going with it, and it's still not.
It's still not done. No, I know it.
We don't even have medical marijuana straightened out yet.
No, I know.
We're jumping into recreational, and I know the state numbers were overwhelming, but Leominster was 51-49.
I heard that recently too.
And I can't tell you how many people say to me, call them the silent majority or call them what you want. People, again, in a grocery store. I make a point of going grocery shopping for 2 hours, 3 hours, because everybody will come up to you in a social setting. They won't call, they won't show up at a city council meeting because they're concerned about making public statements at a podium. They're nervous.
Sure.
But if they trust you, they'll talk to you. People will say, and it's kind of I don't want to say it's a poor excuse, but people will say, I voted for it to be legal in Massachusetts because I agree it should be. But I didn't think it was going to be in Leominster near my house, or I didn't think it was going to be around the corner. So, Leominster is a part of Massachusetts, I tell them, so it is part of the big equation. But, I think that's going to be considered on the amount of people I've heard from to do that.
Okay.
Yeah, Fitchburg was 57%, but I tell people, yes, I'm listening to the 57% who want it. We need to balance that against the interests of the 43% who have legitimate concerns, and we need to therefore roll this out in a way that respects both sides rather than saying, okay, well, you've got 7% more, so you get everything you want across the board with no consideration for... And I don't think any of the supporters want that either. I've talked to some of them, and they've said they want to make a good impression on the people who don't understand cannabis and so forth. And so that's really what I think we need to do, is take it in a way that everyone can be comfortable with.
So we're going to continue on along this theme, and we go to issue 2, which is ballot initiatives and voter referendums in general. So 24 states currently allow initiative petitions where groups of private citizens write a proposed law, gather enough signatures to put it on the ballot for a vote. It goes through the filter of the state attorney general to make sure that it is constitutional. It would be a constitutional law that they've submitted. California is famous for their ballot initiatives. They average about 18 questions every election. But then in the other end of the spectrum, you have a large state like New York that does not allow initiative petitions at all and leaves lawmaking to the elected lawmakers. Do you support the initiative petition process in Massachusetts? Should we keep it? Should we abolish it? Or somewhere in the middle, should we make changes with it? Is it working? Is this a proper way to govern? Councilor Zarrella.
I would be much more comfortable with non-binding initiatives. The problem with a binding initiative is that, like you said, a citizens group drafts a law. In a normal legislative process, people can debate the law, they can offer amendments, they can say, well, this sounds good, but this piece here, could really use a tweak. In a ballot initiative, all you can say is yes or no. You can either adopt the whole law or reject the whole law. And I think that's what we saw. Councilor Freda was saying there were some people who voted for marijuana, for example, but don't really like necessarily the way it's being rolled out. Well, they were only given a choice. They could either vote for legalization with all the provisions included, or vote against legalization. So if they thought legalization was a good idea, they probably voted for it and kind of bit their tongue. But if it had been done through an actual legislature representing constituencies of various sorts, then it could have been tweaked and massaged into a form that people might be more comfortable with across the board.
Okay. Councilor Freda, voter initiatives, is this the way to govern?
I agree, voter initiatives ought to be allowed. And it'd be up to the legislature to weed them out. I mean, if you get somebody who wants to cut taxes, I mean, that's going to happen. But that's part of the democracy. If somebody really feels strongly about something, but I think there might have to be some regulations put in place, because then it just encourages difficulty. And I go back to the marijuana piece only because it was drawn up by citizens who didn't have the legal background to do it the proper way. So when it gets to the legislature, they can't deal with it. If they had dealt with it originally when how many times was that brought to the legislature and tabled? So that's what forced the citizen petition. So if it had been done right in the beginning, it would have been a little bit better. I do support citizen initiatives, but I think it has to be looked at carefully and maybe strengthened a little bit as to what's allowed in the process.
Michael?
Well, I agree with Councilor Freda for the most part, with one small exception I'll get to in a second. But, Councilor Zarrella, I just, to make all citizens initiatives non-binding, I think, you have a balance here. You have to have a balance between democracy and a democratic republic that we are. And I do believe there are some issues where you can really gauge will of the people as being something that should control certain issues. Cutting all the taxes to just bare bones, is maybe not one of them, because human nature, you're going to want things like that. But certain things, I do believe ultimately it's the will of the people, and I think where I disagree slightly with you, Councilor Freda, is just I just think on initiatives like marijuana, we don't want to overthink it. This is something that's being used. It's something that's being done. It's something that's in our culture, whether we like it or whether we're comfortable with it or not. And I just don't see the great, and obviously you speak to some constituents you mentioned in the grocery store who would disagree with me.
Well, it is more than a grocery store. I just use that as a example.
But I just don't see this great, overturning of society because we're allowing the use of marijuana.
Sure.
So I just think it's one of those cases where, yes, not only are issues like that made for citizens initiative, but I would go as far as say, yep, it's a correct issue for a binding citizen.
Absolutely, because if it was up to the legislature, they probably would not have voted that in. So, and my issue with the marijuana is, a lot of people talk to you in the grocery store. Do they say that about alcohol, about the local bar rooms or taverns? Because people go there and they have a drink. You might go for a drink after work. All of a sudden, for some reason, everybody's scared of marijuana, as if that's so far more dangerous than alcohol. And I think absolutely the opposite. I think alcohol is far more dangerous than marijuana. And yet, everybody, the people they're scared. Not my backyard. Do you have any bars in your town? Do you have liquor stores in your town? I agree, you might not want a marijuana shop or a cafe next to an elementary school. I mean, that makes sense. You wouldn't put a bar room there, but to have shops, to me, I don't understand why it's taken so long to figure out how to implement this. We can look at other states and figure it out, what works, what doesn't work.
Well, again, that's one issue, though. The marijuana is one issue. But we're talking
I'm
more
just saying,
of a broader picture of initiative petitions, referendums. I mean, there was a lot of controversy when voters in Massachusetts voted pretty overwhelmingly to roll back the income tax to 5%. The legislature turned around before that rollback was going to go into effect and said, no, we're declaring a fiscal emergency and we're not going to do that. And when it comes to that, I mean, and that's pretty clear cut. You either roll it back to 5% or you keep it where it is. Should legislators at that point, so we'll use that example, just to get away from the marijuana issue.
Sure.
Do we use that example and say, you know what, legislators say, okay, you know what, this is what the people voted for. It was clear cut. Let's do it. And then if programs get decimated and they get hurt from it, they can come back at the next state election in 2 years and put it back up. That's up to them. Is that fair, or do you think that elected officials have a responsibility to say, no, you really don't understand the budget implications of something like this, and we can't, because that's what they did?
I think absolutely. I think elected officials have to exercise overriding judgment on that sort of thing, because ultimately, first of all, ultimately the voters aren't going to blame themselves. If they put themselves over a fiscal cliff, they're still going to blame the legislature. They're going to see the legislature saying, okay, we don't have enough money for this program, this program, this program, and they're going to say, the legislators just cut this program. But second of all, I think that's one of the reasons that our founders originally did set up a republic rather than a direct democracy, quite aside from any logistical issues. Madison was very concerned that, as he put it, the public good is often disregarded in the conflicts of rival parties, and measures are too often decided not according to the rules of justice and the rights of the minor party, but by the superior force of an interested and overwhelming majority. And interested in that particular sense, he's talking about financial interest. He's talking about exactly that sort of thing, that people are going to vote whatever puts more money in their pockets, but it can devastate and decimate an economy to put that in the control of just a popular vote. There's never going to be a popular vote to not cut taxes on the majority and either cut them across the board or load them onto a perceived advantaged minority. If you put that just as a popular vote, you're going to wind up with collapse really quickly.
Well, it's funny you bring that up on the economic implications and how it can affect an economy. I mean, we came up with these topics a couple weeks ago, and just coincidentally, yesterday there was an article in the local paper where Charlie Baker was in a meeting with a bunch of small businessmen, and this was a big topic. And they're very concerned about the citizen initiatives coming up in the state elections this year, which deal with both paid maternity time, paid sick time, and also raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour. And they feel that the average voter is not going to understand the implications that this could have on the economy. And they asked the governor what he felt about it. And the governor said, well, these initiative petitions should go to the legislature first and have the legislature try to work it out and see if they can satisfy what the initiative is attempting to accomplish. Maybe a compromise over a longer period of time for a minimum wage increase or a different amount, and then see where we go from there. Do you think that's a process that we should be looking at, as initiative petitions should go to the legislature first?
Possibly, but I think most people, are commonsensical. I mean, I think if the legislature says we really can't do this because it's going to really cut programs that we all care about, but on the other hand, when those same people that put the initiative in sees the legislature voting themselves a gigantic raise, how do you argue that point? I mean, I've been in Leominster 30 years, and I can tell you there aren't a whole lot of times that we voted for budget increases or change things that people have really gotten angry with us. There's always going to be a few. But we haven't had droves of people come in and say, why are you doing this? Because they see that the money that we approved or the raising of their taxes have fixed their roads, have done a lot. People want to see the results of their payment. And I think that makes a difference.
And we also rely on the elected officials to explain that to us. We might vote for something and say, I want all the roads fixed, like you said, and say it's not possible. Well, explain that. Explain the budgeting process. We went through a similar thing in Ashburnham recently where, a lot of roads are horrible, absolutely horrible. There's just no money in the budget. So they're focused on a major Route 101, which is, public safety and ambulances to get them to the hospital. So they're like, you got to do one thing at a time. And people are like, well, the heck with 101. I want my road done. Well, you got to look at that, and you have to be sensible about it. But it's up to the elected officials to explain that to the public and say, look, this is what we have in the budget this year. Where would you like us to put it?
If we look up to the north of us in Maine, you have Governor LePage up there, who I think is a nut job. Okay, he's an absolute wacko, but he made a good point. And he is known for just blatantly ignoring citizen initiative petitions, telling the legislatures to just ignore it. It's just a recommendation. But he makes a good point in that the legislative process seems to have been taken over and hijacked by lobbyists and corporate interests and money. And now they're aiming towards citizen initiatives, where these really aren't citizens writing these. They are lobbyist groups, they're special interests, they're corporations writing these ballot initiatives because they can't get around the legislature, and then funding these campaigns. Is that a concern?
Oh, no, I mean, I suppose it could be in theory, but I mean, LePage, like in most issues, he's all wet because you're talking about a group of millions of people now. So who's more susceptible to influence by lobbyists? A group of a couple hundred in terms of a legislature, or a group of millions, as in, the state of Massachusetts, 6 million, and the state of Maine, however million they have, okay? So yeah, sure, in theory, that's true, but I would say that's not a valid reason to limit citizen initiatives because the chance of the corporate influence corrupting the process is much greater in a legislative body than it is for the citizenry as a whole.
I think it really depends on what the issue is. In some issues, there's really only a lobbyist group on one side, and in the legislature, you've got the lobbyist group pulling in one direction, but the legislature has all its other issues pulling in another direction. They're looking at the budget, they're looking at other things they could be funding, they're looking at how it will interact with other laws. A ballot initiative just poses it as a black and white question. So if you've got a lobbyist corporation or a special interest group pulling for issue A, and you've got no one pulling for not A, then all the voters are hearing are slogans and catchphrases from lobbyist group A, and they're not hearing, okay, well, there isn't really a not A case being made right now, but there's all these other things that it will affect, and it loses nuance. That's my concern about initiative petitions. It loses nuance.
Councilor Freda, last word on this issue. The citizens' initiatives, are they susceptible to being corrupted by lobbyists and corporations?
Anything's susceptible to corruption. I mean, but if you're not going to get both sides correct, I mean, you get the lobby. The group that's got the most money is the one that's going to make the biggest impression on the whole. So does it affect the legislature? Absolutely it does. I mean, all you got to do is look at the gun control, and I won't even talk to you about that one, but all you got to do is look at that and how much money is put into that to make the point. So yeah, I still agree with citizens petitions, but legislators have to have the guts to look at it and say, this is nuts, or this is really a good idea. Let's get the people in and fix it.
Okay. Issue 3, totally shifting gears here. Since the Parkland shooting, there's been a lot of talk about the Second Amendment and that gun control that we're not going to talk about tonight. But lately, we're also starting to hear a lot. That's good. Lately, we're also starting to hear a lot of talk about the Fourth Amendment when it comes to school safety. Some schools are proposing, and Parkland School itself is now requiring that backpacks must be clear so they can more easily detect any kind of contraband. Some schools in Alabama and Ohio, among others, have started utilizing gun-sniffing dogs on their campuses. I know even in Fitchburg there was some controversy with the school committee last year in a vote on whether to use use drug sniffing dogs to combat the opiate crisis. So when it comes to, where do you land when it comes to Fourth Amendment privacy rights of students versus looking at school safety in this day and age, Councilor Freda?
I think there's a thin line there. I mean, again, you're talking about the safety of the whole group. I'm a soccer fan. I've had season tickets for 20 years. I have to have a clear bag if I go into Gillette Stadium. You know, without violating my privacy. I want everybody to be able to have a clear bag so I know who I'm sitting next to doesn't have anything that's going to hurt me. Go in an airplane. I mean, why should a school be that much different? And a kid doesn't have to take a backpack to school. I mean, if he doesn't want to do the clear bag, carry your books. I mean, it's not a necessity. The gun sniffing dogs, that's kind of that's a different topic. I mean, a different subject. That can be a little bit intimidating, I think. So I don't know how I feel about that one. But as far as clear bags and being up front for the safety of all the kids in the school and the faculty, I mean, I don't see anything really that wrong with it and violating any rights.
Michael?
Well, again, I tend to agree with Councilor Freda on this issue. I mean, first of all, the Fourth Amendment is really not a right to privacy. It's a right. It's a right against unreasonable search and seizure.
Right.
And now, of course, the courts have interpreted a right to privacy sort of interwoven in that. However, what the courts have also done is they've applied a different set of standards when it comes to inside the schools. Okay, so the constitutionality of some of these issues is really not in question. So it's not really a constitutional violation to begin with. So you do have to balance safety considerations, on some of these issues. And I do agree that it's a little unsettling to have gun sniffing dogs in schools. Okay, I think there really needs to be a clear outlined purpose if you're going to be that intrusive. There is a balancing act here, but in general, I mean, let's not fool ourselves that once you go inside the school walls, there's going to be some different standards that have to apply.
Cindy?
I actually agree. I look at it like, similar, like Claire said, you go to an airport and you don't think twice about that. We all want to be safe. Nobody wants to get on a plane with weapons or anything. So you don't think anything about turning over your bags and everything's searched and you go through everything, and that's the privilege of flying. And going to school, I mean, it's a major issue. If you don't want armed guards there, but I mean, what do you want? How do you want to solve this? We're never going to ban guns, so that's not going to happen. So clear backpacks, it's one step that may or may not work, but try it. And if it helps keep them safer, I say go for it.
Councilor Zarrella?
Actually, I'd say I agree there's no real constitutional issue here. I agree that both the rules are a little bit different in schools, and we already have other government buildings that are treated under sensitive security regimens. You can't go into the State House without opening your bags and putting stuff through a metal detector. Or rather,
courthouse.
opening your bags if they ask you to. Or courthouse, exactly. The specific examples, though, I don't think they're actually great policies. As far as the dogs, I think there's too much of a risk that any kid who wears clothing or carries bags that they've used to go to a range or go hunting or anything might have gunpowder residue that the dogs are going to alert to. As far as clear backpacks, it would be a decent idea if the problem were kids bringing guns to school. But I did a check. I looked up all the school shootings since Columbine. It turns out that in only 6 of them did the student actually have the gun with them in classes prior to the shooting. All the rest were either a student who started shooting right at the beginning of the day when they arrived at school, came from home with a gun, or it was a non-student coming onto campus with a gun. So I think searching the students after they're in the school is closing the door after the horse is out. You've really got to be securing the entrances, whether that's with searches or metal detectors or whatever. It's people coming into the schools that's the issue. It's not a student sitting in class all day and then pulling out a gun at recess. That has been it's happened a few times, but those have been single fatality incidents, and they've been a clear minority of all the.
And just quickly on the gun-sniffing dogs, they don't have to be intimidating. They're not necessarily German
Sure.
Shepherds or Dobermans. I know when I come back from Italy, there's this little fluffy sniffing dog that always catches my friend Amy Walsh's apple that she ate on the way back. That's it. We're out. Bye.